In the frozen stillness of Scandinavia's far north, where the forests sleep under blankets of snow and the sun barely brushes the horizon, Christmas arrives cloaked in silence, and something else. Not all stories told by firelight are merry. Some are warnings. Some are memories. Some are neither alive nor dead. They say that when the clock strikes midnight on Christmas Eve, long after the last carol has faded, the church doors creak open on their own. From beneath the snow-covered earth, the dead begin to stir, not with anger, but with purpose. Cloaked in burial shrouds, they gather not to haunt the living, but to attend a sacred ritual, a mass whispered through centuries of frost and forgotten prayers. This is no festive celebration. This is the midnight mass of the dead, an ancient tale carved into the bones of the Nordic winter, where the veil between life and death lifts, just long enough for the lost to return. So if you find yourself near an old country chapel on Christmas night, listen closely. The snow may be falling, the world may seem still, but beneath it all, the dead may be walking. Long before the sound of church bells echoed through the icy valleys of Scandinavia, the people gathered beneath the longest night of the year, not to celebrate Christmas, but to honor Yule. It was a time of fire and fear, of feasting and shadows. The sun had all but vanished, and in its absence, the veil between the worlds grew thin, so thin in fact, that the dead could walk among the living. Bonfires were lit to drive back the darkness. Offerings of bread, mead, and meat were laid out, not for gods alone, but for spirits, ancestors, lost children, old warriors, and nameless souls with unfinished business. To forget them was to invite misfortune. To welcome them was to ensure the turning of the wheel, the return of light. The Yule season was never just about survival. It was a sacred negotiation with the unseen. And when Christianity arrived, it did not erase these ancient rites. Instead, it absorbed them. Yule became Christmas, but the old beliefs, the ones whispered in the dark, never truly died. They linger still, just beneath the surface, like footsteps beneath the snow. In the remote villages of Norway, Sweden, and Iceland, where snow piles high against timber walls and winter silence presses in like a weight, there lingers an unsettling tale, one passed quietly from elders to children, from hearthside whispers to written folklore. They call it Yule Messa for the Doda, the Christmas Mass of the Dead. It is said that on Christmas Eve, when the living are tucked safely into bed and the world is hushed beneath a veil of snow, the old village churches become something else entirely. As midnight nears, faint candlelight flickers behind stained glass windows that should be dark. The bell tower, untouched, rings once, twice, 12 times. Then the doors swing open without a hand to move them. And the dead begin to arrive. From the graveyard they emerge, draped in tattered burial shrouds, frost clinging to hollow eye sockets. They take their seats in the pews with uncanny reverence. These are not angry spirits, but solemn ones, returning not for vengeance, but for ritual. At the altar stands a priest, long since buried beneath the same cold earth. His robes are moth-eaten, his skin a pale husk. Yet he lifts his arms and begins the Mass, chanting in a voice that echoes like wind through bones. No hymns of joy are sung here, only low, murmuring Latin prayers, half forgotten and older than memory. The sound seems to seep through the stone, chilling the very air. Some say the entire church glows with an otherworldly light, dim and bluish, as if lit from beneath the ground. Others claim that frost creeps across the walls from the inside, spelling words no one dares to read. The service ends just before the first light of dawn, and just as quietly as they came, the dead return to their graves, vanishing into the snow as if they were never there. By morning, the church stands empty, yet the air still smells faintly of candle wax and earth, and in some corners, the pews remain warm. This is no mere ghost story. It is a ritual older than Christmas itself, a spectral liturgy performed by those long gone to remind us that even in death the need for peace and prayer endures. Among the most chilling parts of the Midnight Mass legend is the tale of the living guest, a soul who enters the church by mistake and barely escapes with their life. In the oldest versions, it's a lonely traveler, a farmhand lost on his way home, or a merchant caught in a snowstorm. In others, it's a curious local, drawn by the flicker of candlelight seen through the frosted church windows. Cold, tired, and unaware of the hour, they push open the heavy wooden doors, thinking to find warmth or prayer. At first, all seems calm. The church glows softly with candlelight, and figures sit silently in the pews. The traveler takes a seat near the back, too grateful for shelter to question the strange silence or the bone-chilling cold that seems to seep up from the floor. But as his eyes adjust, unease begins to creep in. The congregation is too still. No one breathes. No one turns a page. Some sit in twisted postures as if their limbs no longer remember life. He glances at the altar, where a gaunt, unfamiliar priest begins to speak in a low, guttural tongue. Then a sound. A faint whisper beside him. He turns and gasps. Seated next to him is a childhood friend, long since buried, her skin pale and her eyes hollow with sorrow. She leans close and whispers, "Leave now, while you still can." Terror floods his chest. He stumbles to his feet, knocking over a hymn book. The dead turn, slowly, together. Their hollow gazes follow him as he bolts through the doors and into the snow. Some versions say he makes it home, never to speak of it again. Others say he collapses in the snow, his hair turned white with fright, his mouth frozen open in a silent scream. And then there are the darkest tales, of those who never left. Found the next morning, frozen solid in a pew, their faces twisted in horror, their hands gripped tight to splinters of the bench, as if something had tried to hold them there. To enter the church at midnight on Christmas Eve is not merely a mistake. It is to step between worlds, where time forgets itself, and the dead do not take kindly to the living interrupting their rites. Not all who encounter the midnight mass of the dead do so by accident. Some are warned if they know what to look for. Across the snowy reaches of Scandinavia, folklore tells of signs, subtle and strange, that reveal when the veil is thinning and when the dead are gathering. First, the church doors, heavy, ancient things, may swing open on their own, creaking as if moved by unseen hands. No wind, no footsteps, just a slow, solemn invitation that no one dares to accept. Then, the temperature drops, not with the cold of night, but with a stillness so absolute it feels as though the world itself is holding its breath. Inside the church, icicles begin to form, not outside, but along the altar rail, dripping from the pulpit, clinging to the edges of hymn books. Frost blooms across stained glass from the inside, spiraling in patterns like runes no one can read. Even animals sense it first. Farm dogs growl at nothing, then retreat in fear. Cows refuse to enter their stalls. Horses shiver uncontrollably or go lame near the church path. And birds, usually still fluttering even in winter, disappear entirely. Then comes the unnatural silence. No wind, no rustle of trees, no crunch of footsteps. The churchyard, normally a place of quiet reflection, becomes suffocatingly still. Snow falls but makes no sound, and somewhere beyond that silence, the faint scent of burnt wax and earth drifts in the air. Village elders, once children themselves when they first felt the chill, spoke of these omens in hushed tones. They told their sons and daughters, if you ever see frost on the bell rope, or hear the bell toll 12 times with no one inside, stay away. Don't look in, don't go near, and above all, don't enter. Some say these signs were meant to protect the living. Others believe they were deliberate warnings from the dead themselves, not to be seen, not to be disturbed. Because to ignore the signs is to risk becoming part of the ritual. A guest who was never invited but never allowed to leave. The Midnight Mass of the Dead is more than a ghost story whispered on cold winter nights. It is a reflection of two worlds colliding, the ancient Norse understanding of death and the Christian promise of salvation. In this haunting ritual, pagan roots and Christianity intertwined, creating a tradition that feels both sacred and spectral. To the pre-Christian Norse, death was not an end, but a transition, a journey to realms like Hell, Valhalla, or Folkvanger, depending on one's fate, valor, or kinship. The dead were not distant. They were present, part of the household, the land, the very fabric of Yule itself. Ancestral spirits returned during the darkest nights of the year, not to harm, but to reconnect, to bless the hearth, guard the home, or to be remembered through ritual offerings left on tables and thresholds. But when Christianity spread through Scandinavia, it brought a very different view. Death now carried the weight of judgment, penance, and the hope of resurrection. Graves became sacred resting places, and rituals were relocated from the home to the church. Yet, the old beliefs, too ancient to erase, were not destroyed. Instead, they were transformed. The midnight mass became a hybrid rite, a gathering of spirits in a consecrated space, led by a priest, dead himself, delivering a sacred mass. But this mass was not for the living. It was for those who never found peace, souls forgotten, unburied, excommunicated, or denied final rites. Here, Norse respect for the ancestral dead met Christian ritual and redemption. The church became a liminal space where two spiritual traditions coexisted in eerie harmony. The candles the dead carry, a nod to both the light of Yule and the eternal flame of the soul. The Mass itself, a Christian rite, but whispered in silence as if honoring the invisible gods of old. Even the procession from the graveyard echoes Norse funeral rites, where the dead were guided home by torchlight during Yule. In the end, the midnight mass of the dead is not a tale of fear, but of yearning. A solemn reminder that even in death, souls seek closure, a final ritual, a moment of peace, or simply to be remembered. And perhaps that is the true message of this myth, that the line between old and new, living and dead, sacred and profane, was never as solid as we believed. The legend of the midnight mass of the dead is not confined to a single village or valley. Across Norway, Sweden, and even parts of Iceland, tales have been passed down, spoken by firelight, written by scholars, and etched into the memories of children warned to stay indoors on Christmas Eve. By the 18th and 19th centuries, folklorists like Peter Christen Asbjørnsen and Evald Tang Christensen began to document these chilling accounts, not as fiction, but as serious reflections of rural belief and cultural memory. One of the most well-known tales comes from Värmland, Sweden, where a young farm boy, returning home late on Christmas Eve, caught sight of a slow, silent procession winding its way through the snow. Dozens of pale figures moved as one, shadows barely distinguishable from the falling flakes, headed toward the old wooden chapel. Terrified, the boy ducked behind a tree. As they passed, he recognized faces he hadn't seen in years. His grandfather, his uncle, even a local blacksmith, all long buried. Another story from northern Norway tells of a maid sent to tidy the village church before the morning Christmas service. Alone in the candlelit space, she swept the aisle and dusted the altar, but just as the clock struck midnight, the church organ let out a low, wheezing note. The keys moved by themselves, playing a mournful hymn she didn't recognize. Frozen in fear, she fled, only to faint at the church door, found the next morning with frost on her fingertips and white streaks in her hair. In western Sweden, an older account tells of a hunter who, hearing the church bell ring at an unusual hour, approached the chapel out of curiosity. Peeking through the frosted window, he saw the church filled, not with the living, but with the dead, seated neatly in rows, facing forward in eerie silence. Before he could move, an elderly woman turned and looked directly at him. His own mother, who had died the year before. Her gaze was not loving, but stern. Her lips moved. "You must not watch." These tales were not meant to merely entertain. They served as moral and spiritual warnings, passed from parent to child with the weight of tradition. If the dead gather, do not disturb them. Do not speak. Do not stare. Do not enter. Pray. Watch from afar. And if you must run, run before they notice you. In these stories, survival was not about bravery. It was about respecting the ancient rhythm of life and death. The midnight mass was never meant for the living, and those who forgot that often did not live to tell the tale. Though the midnight mass of the dead was held for spirits long gone, the living were never mere bystanders. Their actions, intentional or careless, could determine whether the dead remained at peace or returned with unrest. In many Scandinavian villages, Christmas Eve was not just a celebration. It was a night of stillness, of sacred observance. Families dimmed their lights, lowered their voices, and refrained from unnecessary activity, not out of exhaustion, but out of respect. It was believed that the veil between worlds was thinnest on this night, and any disturbance could call attention from the unseen. No spinning wheels turned, no weaving was done. To leave thread half-spun or cloth unfinished was an invitation for spirits to entangle themselves, or worse, complete the work with ghostly hands, an omen that death was near. Children were told to sit still, not to laugh too loud or run about. Loud celebration was viewed as disrespectful. The night did not belong to them, it belonged to those who once were. Candles were lit in windows and left to burn until dawn, guiding lights for wandering souls, especially for ancestors who might return to their old homes just once a year. A place was set at the table for those who could no longer eat. Bread, butter, and ale were left on the doorstep or hearth, not to be consumed by the living, but as an offering to the dead or to mysterious beings who roamed the winter dark, elves, spirits, or ancestral shades. To forget to make an offering, or worse, to mock the tradition, was a serious offense. Tales were told of families who laughed too loud, worked too late, or ignored the signs, and were visited by noises in the rafters, footsteps on the roof, or the sound of weeping outside their door. Sometimes, one member of the household would fall ill the next morning, and not see the next Yule. In some villages, elders recited a chilling phrase, "Treat the dead as guests, or become one next year." It wasn't just folklore, it was a way of life, a fragile contract between the living and the dead. To honor the spirits meant to preserve balance, to keep the thin line between the two realms from collapsing. Because while the dead sought peace, they also sought acknowledgement, and in forgetting them, the living risked becoming them. Today, the Christmas season sparkles with lights, laughter, and warmth. Children unwrap gifts by the fire, choirs sing in candlelit chapels, and midnight comes with joy, not fear. But deep beneath these modern traditions lie older echoes, quieter, colder, and far older. The tale of the midnight mass of the dead is more than a ghost story. It's a reminder that the past never truly sleeps. That even in our brightest moments, we walk through a world built on the bones of memory, on rituals whispered in frost and beliefs carved in silence. Not all spirits return to haunt. Some come only to be seen, if only for a moment. To sit once more in the places they loved, to finish the prayers they never completed, to remind us that we are never as far from them as we think. So this Christmas Eve, when the wind is still and the snow falls soft and thick, pause. Listen. Perhaps, just beyond the trees, just beneath the silence, you'll hear the distant toll of a church bell long silent, and the gentle crunch of footsteps, not yours, moving through the snow. The midnight mass has ended, but the story lives on.
Thank you for watching. Please like, share, and subscribe.